Hi, boys and girls. So now I'm going to read you chapter 12 of What Could Go Wrong. Eddie repeated the words, sounding dazed. A message in code. Geez, what did it say, Gracie? I remember how he'd sat there reading his stupid old comic book instead of watching what was happening to me. It made my tone sarcastic. It was in code, Eddie. That means it wasn't written in plain English. I don't know what it said. No, I mean, what were the letters written out? Maybe we can decipher the code. Can you remember what the letters were? He's right, Charlie said. If you remember them, write them down right away before you forget what they were. You guys are still getting secret messages out of cereal boxes. This one isn't going to say the treasure is hidden behind the couch or whatever. This is something serious. Sure, we know that. Here. Charlie reached over and took the scrap of newspaper out of my hand, turning it over so he didn't write on top of the phone number Aunt Molly had given me. You talk, and I'll write. Let's get it down. You do remember it, don't you? It wasn't very long, was it? No, but I'm not sure I can remember it all. I didn't realize it was important, I said, but I recited what I thought the letters and numbers had been, and Charlie carefully wrote them out and looked at them. X's and more numbers than letters. I had an unpleasant thought. I was trying to fit in my words, and I erased a couple of his letters. They may be mad when they find out it's not all still there. And come looking for me, I wondered to ask what I'd erased. I thought it was all over when the enemy walked away with the newspaper, and now it occurred to me that it might not be over, that they might come and get me if I didn't tell them what I had erased. I swallowed audibly. The newspaper belonged to the guy in the loud shirt, Eddie pointed out. He must know what he wrote there. Then why is he here? Why did he come up and take it away from me? Yeah, Charlie said, not making me feel any better. If he wrote it there himself and, say, left it on his seat for someone else to pick up, like Mr. Upton, only Mr. Upton saw Gracie take the paper. And the Upton guy knew he'd lost it, so he quick went and called Hawaiian Shirt wherever he'd gone, so he'd know. That's why he was late getting on the plane. Told them at the desk it was an emergency or something. He paused to think, working it out in his head. So Charlie's just guessing that this is what probably happened based on everything that has already gone on. Let's see. Upton knew somehow that Gracie gave the paper to Mrs. Basker. He saw her stick it in her flight bag, the old lady, I mean, and after he got on the plane, he tried to get the bag away from her long enough to get the paper back. He apparently didn't see her give the paper to Gracie, and when his attempts to steal the bag didn't work, remember how he tried to get the seat next to Mrs. Basker, and how grouchy he was when the flight attendant said he had to sit where he'd been assigned? He used some ruse to get her off where he could hit her over the head and search her stuff. He probably pulled a weapon on her, Eddie said, nodding. Told her that he'd hurt her if she didn't go with him. Sure. And when he didn't find the paper, he figured she must have passed it along to Gracie, who kept talking to her, so they started watching us. And when they realized Gracie actually had the paper, the guy in the loud shirt just walked up to her and took it. It sounded horribly logical, but there was a lot of gaps. But if the guy in the Hawaiian shirt wrote the message, why would he need the paper back? Why would he fly all the way to Portland to get it when he apparently hadn't intended to get on our plane in the first place? He didn't remember what it was, Eddie said promptly. That's why people write things down, like you wrote down the telephone number of Aunt Molly's friend. It's hard to remember numbers, especially if you're middle-aged, Mom says. Or maybe he was only a messenger, Charlie contributed. Maybe he didn't write the message. He was just supposed to deliver it to someone at the airport, Upton, who would then carry it to San Francisco. So why did the other man follow him then? Follow us, I think. I'll bet Upton wasn't sure he'd recognize us, especially Mrs. Basker. So he wanted Hawaiian Shirt along to be sure he had got the right person. So they're just guessing that these men need to deliver this message to somebody, and that they don't know who they're delivering it to or what the message means, and then they're guessing that the men also, maybe don't know what the message means, but that they were maybe being instructed to deliver this message to someone else. So they're saying that's probably why the paper was so important, because they don't really know what was on the paper. They just know it's important, and it needed to get to somebody else. I'll bet Upton wasn't sure he'd recognize us, especially Mrs. Basker, so he wanted Hawaiian Shirt along to be sure he got the right person. And the message is important. They couldn't take a chance on losing it. Yeah, Eddie chimed in. I'll bet the guy in the Hawaiian shirt even chartered the plane to catch up with us in Portland to make sure they got the code message back. Only we weren't supposed to land in Portland, I objected. So how, I'm sorry. So how would he know he could, uh-oh. I didn't like the idea that had just struck me. It struck Charlie at just about the same time. Maybe, Charlie said, almost whispering, he made us land in Portland to give him time to catch up with us. Maybe he called the airlines and told them there was a bomb on Flight 211. They wouldn't take any chances with the plane load of passengers and the crew. They'd come down as soon as they could and call it the people who look for the bombs. So they're saying when they realized that the paper wasn't in the right hands, that these men called the airlines pretending there was a bomb on the plane so that the plane would have to land in Portland, giving the Hawaiian shirt time to catch up with them. Eddie liked that idea, which was more than I did. It made me sure that none of this was a joke. None of it was harmless, and that when the men realized they didn't have the entire message, they would be back. They would be back after me. How could he know it would be Portland where we'd land, though? I asked, hoping my speculations were crazy. We were on a 727. It's too big to land at any of the little airports anywhere else. Portland International was the only logical place, short of San Francisco, Charlie asserted. There wasn't any bomb, Eddie said, sounding awed. They just wanted to get their newspaper back with the message in it. Wow, it must be something really important. And crooked, Charlie added. Very crooked. And dangerous, I croaked. Dangerous for us. After a moment of silence, Charlie handed me the scrap of the edge of the newspaper he'd written on. Here, try calling Aunt Molly again. My finger was unsteady as I dialed. I held my breath, willing her to answer the phone. Hi, this is Molly Portwood. If my caller is Gracie, hang on, kids. I'll be there as soon as I can. I must have looked as bleak as it sounded. It's the same recorded message. She's not back yet. Eddie was less excited and more anxious than he'd been a minute ago. Maybe we ought to call home and tell them what's going on, he said uncertainly. What good would that do? Charlie asked before I could voice my opinion. It must be 800 miles or more and a couple of hours away, even if they flew down here. A day and a half if they drive. They could murder all three of us before our folks could get here if they wanted to. So what are we going to do? We're sitting ducks, I said. Even in this great big airport surrounded by people, we're sitting ducks. Charlie, we'd better go to the police. Talk to the security guards and ask them to lock us up in protective custody, sort of. I watch TV shows, too. Until Aunt Molly shows up, or else have them call the regular police. We could do that, Charlie said, but he sounded as if he were thinking again, and I knew that going into protective custody wasn't what he wanted to do. On the other hand, I don't think I want to know what you think on the other hand, I said, and I wasn't kidding. As usual, he didn't pay any attention to what he didn't want to consider. If we do that, chances are it will be hours, if ever, before we get anyone to believe us. To believe that bomb threat was to slow us down so these mysterious guys could catch up with us, to investigate this situation. I started to shake my head. No, Charlie, no. It's not up to us to investigate it. We're just kids, and we don't know anything about... He interrupted me. We know it's real. We know we're not making it up because we watched one too many cop shows on TV, and we have the coded message, most of it anyway, as Gracie remembered it accurately. Maybe we can figure it out. Maybe we can turn the tables, find those guys and watch them and see what they do. Make sure they don't get away with their crooked business, whatever it is. The first time I ever went swimming in the ocean and got knocked down by a big wave, I felt sort of like I felt then, cold and numb and terrified. That time in the ocean, my dad had been there to grab my hand and pull me out. Now there were only Charlie and Eddie, and I was beginning to think maybe Dad was right about Charlie. Maybe he did attract disasters. The way movie stars drew photographers, he didn't usually get hurt, not too much anyway, but what if this time he wasn't so lucky? What if none of us were lucky? In the middle of those hundreds of people traveling, maybe there were thousands of them right there in that one airport, I felt as alone as I'd ever felt in my whole life. Dad was at least 4 hours away from me. Even if he could get an immediate flight, it would take him almost that long to actually get here by the time he arranged the reservation and drove to SeaTac from where we lived in Marysville. I couldn't depend on my dad to save me this time. Charlie was watching my face, reading my emotions. Eddie and I could keep on investigating and let you go into protective custody, I guess, he said. He sounded neutral, as if it didn't matter whether I stayed with the boys or not, But I had a sudden picture of going back home and having everyone know I'd been a baby, that I chickened out before they did. At least you'd be alive, chicken, a tiny voice said in the back of my brain. My voice shook a little. I don't suppose they could actually do anything to us in such a public place if we stick together. At least they wouldn't actually, hurt us where people would see them. They wouldn't do that to you anyhow, Eddie volunteered. Not until you told them what they want to know about what you erased from their message. If that's supposed to be comforting, I told him, my heart thudding, you might as well know that it isn't working. I had been standing there with the receiver to my ear, hearing all of Aunt Molly's recorded message, and when it came to an end, I hung up. I didn't know what else to do. It seemed pointless to try to explain to the answering machine what was happening to us. She might panic and try to get us so fast she'd wreck her car or something. Eddie's right. They didn't kill Mrs. Basker. There's no reason to think they'd murder us either. What good would that do them? Charlie and his logic again. She's an old lady, and she really didn't know what they were talking about. They knocked her out. That could have killed her. Charlie straightened up, throwing his shoulders back, and I knew he'd made up his mind what he was going to do. You want us to take you to the security guards and leave you to explain what's going on? See what they do? I met his gaze bleakly. I was pretty sure I knew what they'd do. They wouldn't listen, not seriously. If they locked me up, it wouldn't necessarily be in protective custody. I wondered if they had mental wards at juvenile hall. Or do you want to stay with Eddie and me? Charlie asked. My throat hurt so it was hard to speak. I guess I'll stay with you. Only don't do anything really stupid and get us hurt, okay? Charlie grinned. Trust me, he said. And that is the end of chapter 12.